Bobby Lee Claremont and the Criminal Element. Hammond, Louisiana, 9:45 a.m. New Orleans disappeared behind us and the train picked up speed through the bayous, rocking into a steady rhythm, the rails clattering beneath us in a metallic beat. Inside the carriage, everything was quiet. The man in the brown suit read his paper. The rest of us just sat. I looked out the window, watching the trees and moss and mud, the green and wild world so different from the city streets that had raised me. A little thrill ran through me. I had truly left home now. The train rolled on and the bayous flashed by for 45 minutes. Then the conductor walked through the car to announce our first stop at Hammond, Louisiana. As if the train had heard him, the rhythm shifted and the wheels began to slow. At last, with a shriek and a huff of the brakes, we stopped amid a cluster of little houses. Only the presence of the ramshackle, single-room depot gave the place the nerve to call itself a town. The only thing coming or going from Hammond, Louisiana, was the mail. Out of my window I caught sight of the colored boy in the overalls hauling the mail sacks to the baggage car and hoisting them up to a man inside. It struck me as strange. All the other workers I'd seen were grown men. Maybe this boy had lied about his age to get a job, as I had once done at the docks of the United Fruit Company. That had been a good, honest job, except, of course, for the lying I'd had to do to get it. It hadn't paid much, barely enough to keep a roof over our heads when Mammon had grown too sick to work. Then Sister Mary Magdalene had found out and gone to my bosses with the truth about my age. I was out of a job and back in the convent's poorhouse, while Mammon was sent to their hospital. I suppose for Sister Mary Magdalene that was a charitable mercy, but not for me. While the boy loaded the mail, two little colored girls came onto the train with baskets full of homemade pralines, roasted peanuts, and warm cone pones for sale. My mouth watered as my fellow travelers made their purchases, but I only had 2 cents left after paying my fare to Chicago. It might buy an apple or a handful of peanuts somewhere along the way, but I figured it was safer to hold on to it just in case. I turned my thoughts back to my days on the docks, trying to ignore the hot, oily aroma of nuts and fresh fried cornbread. The dock was where I had seen my first Yankee gangster, first realized how high on the hog a man could live with a good, dishonest job. Because while I'd been sweating and straining to earn my pennies, I'd watched a fellow disembark from a gilded riverboat, as lazy and smug as a cat in the sun, a swaggering, pin-striped, polished peacock of a white man, his watch and chain glinting in the sunlight across his well-fed belly. The beautiful blonde woman on his arm was all but swallowed up by long strands of expensive pearls, bright rouge coloring her lily-white cheeks. And as they walked, she kept glancing at him from under her lashes, like he was more than just the bee's knees. He was the whole sweet hive, dripping with honey. "Who's that?" I'd asked the fellow working next to me. "That's trouble," the fellow said. "What kind of trouble?" I asked, thinking that I was sure wouldn't mind being in that kind of trouble. "The kind from up north, kid. The kind that will cut off your nose just for staring at him. So forget about him and get back to work." I got back to work, but I didn't forget about him. And the more I thought about him, the more sure I was that he was a gangster. Maybe Johnny Torrio himself, living large and easy. All the money and food and comfort a body could ask for. Soft hands and clean fingernails and meat with every meal. No toiling like I'd been doing on the dock. Or, for that matter, I now thought as I looked out at the train window, toiling like the older boy on the station platform. As I watched him hoisting the last of the canvas mailbags on board, I reached into my pocket and felt for the newspaper clipping. "More liquor produced in Chicago than before Prohibition," I whispered. When I saw the headline only a day after Mammon's funeral, I remembered the dap yanker from the docks. I took it for a sign that it was time to start a new life in Chicago. The final mailbag disappeared into the baggage car and the boy jumped up after it. A moment later, the workmen on the platform slid the door of the compartment shut. This piqued my curiosity. How would the boy get back out of the baggage car? Before I could contemplate the answer, a voice cut into my thoughts. Would you like a corn pone, son? Allow me. I nearly jumped out my skin. The man in the brown suit who had been reading the paper was now standing in the aisle beside me, grinning down at me. He waved over one of them girls and took 5 corn pones from her basket, piling them in a clean handkerchief in his hand. When he had all he wanted, he reached into his pocket, smearing its edge with grease, and pulled out a nickel for the girl. Then he shooed her away with a flick of his hand, as if she was no more than a pigeon in the street. She scuttled away, head down, trying to be invisible as she retreated from the train car. I frowned. Working the docks and the streets, I'd learned that the colored folks was just trying to get by like the rest of us. The way he got what he wanted and then scorned her told me all I needed to know about this man. But he dismissed my frown as well, and settled himself uninvited into the seat opposite me. He held the pile of corn pones on the handkerchief. Eat 'em while they're warm. Go on, son. Thank you, sir, I said. I wanted to tell him I wasn't his son, but instead I just helped myself to the biggest corn pone and prepared for whatever was coming. I'd lived off charity often enough to know that people didn't buy you breakfast without expecting something in return. Sure enough, after I'd swallowed the last bite and licked the grease from my fingers, he smiled at me, as if to say he had me in his debt and planned to make the most of it. What's your name, son? He said in that easy, friendly voice untrustworthy folks use when they want you to trust them. I didn't, but since he still had a handful of golden cornbread and I still had an empty stomach, I smiled back. Robert E. Lee Claremont, sir, I said, trying to give off a whiff of innocence. He gave a whistle of appreciation. That's a mighty fine name, son, a mighty fine name. Have another. He held out the handkerchief again, and I took another corn pone. This was exactly why Mammon had given me the name, and why I had shared it with him. A boy needed every advantage he could get in this hard world, she always said. For a while I couldn't see how being named after the South's greatest failure was an advantage, but with uppity white men in New Orleans it often paid off. Thank you, sir, I said again. And what's your name? He smiled as polite as he could be. I'm Sergeant Rufus T. Hayworth, and pleased to be making your acquaintance. I froze, the cornbread halfway to my mouth. Sergeant? The train lurched and began moving again. Are you a soldier, sir? I asked, hoping against hope. He chuckled and pulled back his jacket to reveal the badge on his sweat-stained shirt. I'm a member of the Louisiana State Police, son. And I was just wondering what a youngster your age was doing, traveling alone on such a long journey. You're headed to Chicago, I presume? Call me Bobby Lee, I said. If he was fixing to drag me back to the Sisters of Charitable Mercy, he might as well call me by my sinner's name. I was only Robert when Sister Mary Magdalene was making me walk the straight and narrow. I'm going to visit my aunt. She'll be meeting me at the station in Chicago. That's so, said the sergeant, his tone still friendly and conversational, though his eyes were telling me he didn't believe me. What's this aunt's name? Aunt Bertha, sir, I said quickly, knowing hesitation could give away a liar, then wondering if I'd given away by being too quick. She got a fine big car. She's meeting me at the station. I swallowed to make myself hush up before I got in any deeper. Maybe I was too deep already. Sergeant Hayworth was looking at me in that long, hard, considering way, and I couldn't tell where he'd end up after all that considering. The thing is, he said after a spell, I couldn't help noticing the way you hunkered down in your seat before we left New Orleans, like you didn't want to be seen through the windows, like maybe someone might be looking for you. He paused, waiting for me to crack. I blinked and chewed and waited right back, giving away nothing. He frowned, flattened his eyebrows down tight so that his eyes went all hard. The thing is, he said again, leaning in this time like he was sharing a secret, I have it on good authority that those folks behind me, at the rear of the car, They aren't respectable, if you take my meaning. Could be mighty dangerous for a boy on his own. Mighty dangerous. I leaned to look around at him, at the woman and three men, who seemed to be minding their business. My heart gave a little flutter of hope. You mean they're criminals? They might be, son. They very well might be. What kind of criminals? I asked, trying not to let my rising excitement show. Murderers, he whispered, in a way meant to scare me. Cold-blooded killers, son. I leaned out for another quick peek before bending closer and whispering, even the baby? Of course not the baby, but the others. They could be unpredictable and mighty dangerous. So maybe you might want to tell me your real story, son, where you belong. I looked him square in the eye, steady as could be. Yes, sir. I belong with my Aunt Bertha in Chicago. She'll be coming for me in her fine big car, sir. He leaned back then, disappointed that I hadn't spilt my guts. Of course you do. But you be careful, you hear? You tell me if them folks try anything suspicious on this journey. I'm a police officer, and I'll protect you as best as I can. So that was it. He wanted me to be a snitch, and thought he'd buy my services with 2 corn pones and a little fear. I didn't say anything, just gave him a meaningless smile, formulating my own plan. Well, the sergeant said, getting to his feet and dusting the crumbs off his jacket, I think I need a cup of joe to wash down that cornbread. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Robert E. Lee Claremont. He walked to the back of the carriage and opened the door. The clack of the wheels on the track filled the air for a brief moment before the door closed behind him. I continued to look straight ahead with equal parts curiosity and trepidation. With the policeman gone, I had an unencumbered view of the group at the far end of the carriage. Now that he mentioned it, I could see the rakish tilt of a hat and the pinstripes on a suit. And was that the glint of a solid gold watch chain? Criminals. Exactly who I wanted to meet. Only problem was the big man sitting beside the window had been watching me the whole time I'd been conversing with Sergeant Hayworth, and he looked none too happy that I had been fraternizing with the enemy.